The cost of IT in business can be staggering. From hardware and software expenses to services like internet and phone, you don't need to spend a fortune on IT to succeed. If your organization spends more than $500 monthly on any service, or you're considering signing a long-term contract, IT Enabled can help you manage your technology and minimize your costs. Contact us today to schedule a free consultation. IT Enabled, we're here to help.
Hi, I'm Tara Watson-Watkins, President and CEO of the Lufkin, Angelina County Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to the Connect podcast, connecting business to the community. I'm here today with my co-host, Blake Pollino with BP Media Group.
Welcome back. Thanks again for listening this week. This week on the show, we have JB Smith with Deep East Texas Crime Stoppers. Honestly, one of Tara and I's new favorite episodes. We love an episode where someone can come in and just blow our minds and completely subvert our expectations and bust some myths along the way. So a really fun episode. So let's get into that now.
We're excited today to have JB Smith. He is with the Deep East Texas Crime Stoppers. Thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Why don't you tell the listeners about your background, how'd you get to Lufkin, and then we'll talk about what Deep East Texas Crime Stoppers does.
I'm originally from Houston. I grew up, went to school there, but had family in Nacogdoches, so I chose to go to SFA for college. And after that, ended up in Lufkin. It was just kind of happenstance. We are a civil service agency at Lufkin PD, and I tested for there and scored high enough to be hired 28 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
It is.
And you've been with Crime Stoppers the whole time?
No. Now, I've worked with Crime Stoppers the whole time because
Okay.
it's integrated into what we do at the police department, but I took over Crime Stoppers as the originally the law enforcement coordinator some 13, 14 years ago,
Okay.
and took over as the executive director. We're about 10 years in now.
Okay.
Very cool. So if someone's living under a rock and just somehow has missed it, what is Crime Stoppers?
It's great. So most people can tell us two things about Crime Stoppers when they hear the name. They know it has something to do with anonymity, although they're not sure exactly what that is, and something to do with money. And so Crime Stoppers, to give you a little history of it, was an idea that came up in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 1976. They had a high crime rate, a lot of witnesses to crime, but nobody wanted to come forward. And so Greg McAleese was a detective there, and he identified a couple of things that stop people getting involved with assisting law enforcement, and that's fear and apathy. Fear of some reprisal, fear of the courtroom experience, fear of just having to speak to a police officer in some cases. And then apathy, it wasn't my car that was burglarized. I knew to lock my house up, and so it wasn't my house, it was your house, so a little apathy there. And he came up with the idea of how to overcome this fear and apathy. Overcome the fear by providing a way to do this anonymously. You don't have to testify as a witness. You don't have to actually speak to a police officer. You do it through a third party. And then overcome the apathy by offering money. We offer a cash reward. And so that took off. It spread to here, 1982. Crime Stoppers of Lufkin was formed. We later changed our name to Deep East Texas Crime Stoppers as a way to reach more areas. We now cover Angelina County, Houston County, Tyler County, and we assist Trinity County with their program.
I didn't know that.
Oh, cool.
We do. And so Crime Stoppers is a go-between for law enforcement. We are a nonprofit corporation that's run by a civilian board of directors. Although I'm a police officer, it is not run by police officers. I'm just the liaison between our civilian board of directors and the law enforcement community. We have a means of receiving information about crimes, wanted persons, crimes that haven't been discovered yet, in a completely anonymous way, and if that information results in an arrest, a case clearance, property recovery, or several other things, the tipster is likely eligible for a cash reward.
Wow. So it's so funny, having grown up in Lufkin. I was telling JB before we started this that I remember the commercials that used to be on. And so like hearing the cash reward and the anonymous, all of that video just started like replaying in my mind. 639 TIPS, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Wow, that's good marketing right there.
That is.
But you know, those started a long time ago. But is it really anonymous?
It is. So not only is it anonymous, it's the law in Texas that we keep you anonymous.
Okay.
Anyone, including a police officer, would be committing a crime if we intentionally or knowingly revealed the contents of a tip or the identity of a tipster. So it's a Class A misdemeanor to a state jail felony for us to give out somebody's
Wow.
name. So we're serious about it. And to make sure of that, we won't at Crime Stoppers take anybody's name. And so we have 3 means of submitting tips. You can do it through our tip line, which you thankfully
Thank you.
remembered, 936-639-TIPS, which for those of you not looking at the phone is 8477. Our website is 639tips.com, and then on there you can access a mobile app. It's called the P3 Tips app. And if you submit it through there, and sometimes somebody will submit a tip and they'll say, I don't know the address of this, but I live at 123 Any Street, and if you're facing my house, it's on the left. Well, we don't want that to ever accidentally slip out. So we figure out what is to the left of 123 Any Street, and that's what we pass on to law enforcement.
Okay.
So they never get any identifying information. And sometimes people will mess up, and they'll say, if you need more information, call me. So we remove that before it ever goes to a law enforcement officer to look at. So the officer never knows who the person is.
Wow.
I had no idea that you were a separate entity
Completely separate.
from law
A
enforcement.
nonprofit corporation run by itself.
Interesting. I had no idea. I guess that helps keep that.
It does.
anonymity.
In that way, our records. So
Yeah.
although we have this information, and somewhere in the history of the tip, maybe that phone number is still stuck in the coding somewhere.
Right.
The Texas statutes protect that. So it doesn't matter who possesses that information, it's still a crime to reveal it. And that's helped by us being a separate entity.
So, because you're a separate entity, does that allow you to pay the people even though it's anonymous? So
Yes.
you can see their information, but
Well,
the
so that's
police department
a
can't.
great
How does
question.
that
We
work?
still don't even see their information when we pay them.
Really?
So we've partnered with local banks. We have accounts set up that we're able to, if you're our tipster, you've got a tip number and password when you submitted your tip. If it results in something that's reward eligible, say an arrest, we then give you a reward number and a passcode. You take that to this bank and pass it through
No
like
way.
you're making a deposit.
Are you serious?
And they send you cash.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, so
I
we
had
don't
no
know
idea.
who you are at all.
This
Whoa.
could be my favorite
Yeah.
new podcast.
I love
There
it.
you go.
We love like just revealing super interesting, subverting people's expectations on what you thought something was. So the general process is, if I were to leave a tip on a crime anonymously and it results in an arrest or recovering of property or whatever it is,
Right.
then you can be paid. So how is that funded? So if you're a separate, so is it
question.
are police departments paying you or donating to you to be able to pay these rewards? How does that
Now,
happen?
probably my favorite part of this is under the legislation in Texas, if a person is convicted of a crime and sentenced to community supervision, probation, whether that's misdemeanor or felony probation, they can be ordered by the judge to pay a fee of $50 to Crime Stoppers. If they are ordered to pay that fee, and many times it happens, Crime Stoppers is only allowed to use that for reward purposes. So we get $50 from criminals to pay for other criminals to get arrested.
No way. That's amazing.
And then that adds up with unfortunately a lot of crime.
Okay.
That adds up quite a bit. So we pay out $25,000 a year in rewards.
Interesting. So it just kind of
Wow.
creates this pool over time that you're able to
right.
pay out over.
That is amazing.
That's
Yeah,
cool.
it really is.
Oh, I love this.
So this is not coming from tax dollars. They're not
No.
coming from police
No, it's
departments
coming
or
from the criminals.
agencies.
The-
Which, I mean, hey, you do the crime, you pay for other people to do the time, I guess.
Aside from me working for Lufkin Police Department, there are no tax dollars involved. We are
so
funded. We're a nonprofit, so we're funded by donations and fundraising. We do an annual raffle, and that helps with our operating expenses. But our rewards come from these probation fees.
Awesome.
Wow. So what type of tips can people call in about?
So really anything. If it is crime related, we'll accept it. Now we'll accept the tips about my neighbor left their trash can out by the road too long. Nothing we can do about it, but we'll accept any information that somebody wants to submit. And sometimes we have people that just need to vent, and they do it, and we accept it, and if there's something can be done about it, we'll do it.
Sure.
But if it's criminal related or if it is a school violation of some type, we accept the tip. So everything from bullying on a school campus to the identity of an unknown murderer. We'll accept that information. On school campuses, we get a lot of tips about vaping and drug activity. And we accept those not because it's the most heinous crime in the world, but it affects the quality of life of the students on campus. If you've got a student who knows if I go into this restroom, there's going to be vaping in there, and I don't want to be seen around it, I don't want to be involved with it, or I don't want somebody to think that I ratted them out.
Yeah.
So they avoid that bathroom in that area, and it affects their quality of life. But also, by them knowing they can submit that tip and we pay a reward for that tip. It tells them later that if there is some crime occurring at home or something they know about going to happen, a potential school safety issue, that they've got a safe way to report this and remain anonymous. And then when it comes to the community tips, we run our crime of the week on our website, 639tips.com. Not always do we have a crime of the week, but if we have something, we'll put it out there. You can report those, or if you know about some other crime that's occurring, we'll accept the information. Not every tip results in a reward. It just doesn't happen. Now, you submit a tip and you know 100% it's absolutely true. But it doesn't mean that law enforcement can validate that information or do it, because no enforcement action can ever be taken based solely on the tip. We need to corroborate that information through investigation and develop probable cause and then go make an arrest. And if it does, then you're eligible for a reward.
Interesting.
So let's talk about the kids that are vaping. I mean, what do you do in that situation?
So Crime Stoppers doesn't, or we just receive the tip and we pass it on to the school that's involved, either the school administrator or the law enforcement officers on campus. They investigate through whatever means. They have cameras on most of these campuses. They might have an officer in the area that catches them doing it, or there might be some other school rules violation that allows them to check a kid's backpack or locker. If they find the vape, they confiscate it, and then whatever the penalty is at the school. It might be in-school suspension, it might be something more, and it's up to the school's rules to decide that. We then, through Crime Stoppers, get a report back from the officer that says we did recover a vape. And so we have a set reward for that, and it has to be approved by our board of directors, but they have set a reward for that, and we pay just like we would for anybody else.
You know, I mean, that didn't even cross my mind that vaping is against the law. I mean,
it is.
You know, that's something you don't think about.
It is. Texas has raised the smoking age to 21, so there's nobody on our school campuses
that should be doing it. That's really interesting.
Interesting. So what are these rewards, dollar amount? So like, let's take the vaping, for example. How much would you get paid if that was?
Well, it'll sound really high, so let me give you the backstory to it. We started off paying $25 for these, and that's because this is several years ago, initially most of the punishment that the students received was a slap on the wrist. It might be in-school suspension for the rest of the day. It might be having their parents called or whatever. Most of the schools now have raised this to automatic suspension of some type on the first violation for the kid, and that's pretty serious. Yeah. So if you might be willing to report on me for having a vape, when it's just going to be me being slapped on the wrist, and it's not going to be a big deal. But when it finds out that you're going to get me suspended, you might be a little more cautious about it. And you might fear a little bit more coming forward because of what I might do in retaliation if I assumed it was you that did it.
Right.
So we raised that reward, and we now pay $100 for a report of a vape.
Good. That's great.
And if it turns out that it is THC, marijuana involved, then we pay more than that. Really? And then anything beyond that, we have a reward schedule. So if it's not a school rules violation, we have a reward schedule that tells us so many points for each thing. So let's say a one crime solved, it's one burglary is solved, and then that's worth a certain number of points. If that was one person arrested, that's worth an extra number of points. How much property was recovered, and we add those points up, and that gives us a dollar value.
Okay, so it's kind of a system.
Scale.
Yeah, there's no cap to it. But there's a base to it at that $100 for the vaping, and that's really where we start.
Interesting. So if you submit a tip that successfully has someone arrested for murder, what would you get paid for that? That's my own morbid curiosity.
Yeah. So if it is, it also depends on the usefulness of the tip information. So if you submitted a tip that says Joe Blow committed the murder, and that's it, and officers then have to spend months trying to figure out who Joe Blow is and how much it is, that would be less valuable than if you were to say Joe Blow committed the murder and the murder weapon is hidden under his mattress in this house.
Interesting.
That would be a lot more valuable.
Okay.
And so our point system would kick in,
right.
And you might be looking at $1,000. You might be looking at $5,000.
Wow.
It's difficult to know. It depends on the circumstances of the case.
I read, and I can't remember. I'll butcher the exact statistic. I can't remember where it was, but a shocking amount of crimes are solved solely based on someone knowing who did it, right? Like Absolutely. Submitting a tip, or it's just a really, really high number of them are hard to solve unless someone says something about something.
They are, because if you're the only one that committed the crime, you're the only one that knows you committed the crime.
Right.
And so until you talk to Tara and you say something about that crime, now she has that information and she can provide it. And sometimes it's the slightest thing. We post these videos and nobody can identify who they are. Our law enforcement officers are really good at what they do, and they know who people are when they see them.
Sure.
And if they don't recognize them in video and we put it out, it might be the symbol on a hat. It might be the,
Sure.
the shadow of a tattoo on somebody's hand. And that's what keys into somebody that gets it. And so by hitting a wide audience through podcasts, through our videos, and through social media, we solve these crimes and solve a surprising number of them.
And where do you post the videos?
On our website, 639tips.com. We are 639tips on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
I'm going to go like
Thank
Yeah.
you.
639 TIPS
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I'm like, I want to go see the videos.
I just like watching
I just want to go see it.
It's interesting. You guys, I love seeing that on social media, and we're obsessed with the algorithms and how stuff works. But anytime you guys post that stuff, it tends to do really, really well,
It does.
just because we want to see what's happening in our community.
There's a
and it's-
morbid curiosity.
It is.
Completely.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
We want to see
I just totally admitted to
what's
it.
happening. Yeah, I have too on this as well. That's great. So if someone submits false information, I'm sure you guys run across
we
that.
do.
How does that process work?
Well, because no enforcement action can be taken based solely on an anonymous tip, nothing happens with it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Now, sometimes we get a tip that says they're selling drugs on any street. And the officers will say, yes, they are.
Yeah.
We need some more details about that. So that's not much of a tip there. Other times they might report that there are drugs in J.B. Smith's house. Well, no one's going to come and kick down a door
Yeah.
because of that anonymous tip. What we would have to do is officers would have to investigate that.
Gotcha.
Does that fit with the profile we know about JB? Does that fit with the traffic coming and going from his house? Maybe we send a confidential informant to the house to try and purchase drugs.
Right.
And so I tell officers, we teach a class for officers before they're allowed to have access to the tips because it's so serious about the anonymity. So they have to attend a 4-hour class before they get access to these tips. And we tell them in there to treat every tip as if it is a sticky note that you found on the floor that says, look over there. Or it is, you're driving down the street and there's somebody flailing their arms on the street corner telling you to look in a direction. When you look in that direction, you see a crime. If you looked in that direction and you saw nothing, you would do nothing.
Yeah.
If you saw a crime, you would do something. And you wouldn't need to know who was pointing in that direction for you to take care of the crime.
Gotcha.
So it's just something that guides you in a certain direction.
Awesome.
This has just been fascinating to me.
Yeah, I love that.
You know, I mean, Brent serves on your
He does.
board, and you know, he doesn't share anything. He's like a vault. I tell people all the time, if you need to tell a secret, go find Brent Watkins because he won't tell anybody.
That's awesome.
But you know, I know he enjoys being on the board because you know we've all got this morbid curiosity of
Yeah.
what's going on, but I think it's so great of what y'all do and how long you've done it, and I love getting to know the background of this because like I said, you know, I remember that the bar shutting on the commercial and I could hear that in my head, but to now know the background of it and how all of that happens, it's fascinating. So
Yeah, it is a great program.
Yeah.
And it's a great program that doesn't take any of our tax dollars.
That's right.
So it's
Yeah.
really community funded.
I loved finding that out. I mean, 'cause I just fully assumed that like this is state or city funding or county or something like that, but that's a really cool way to keep that funding going. So.
It is. Yeah,
Thanks,
that's
JB,
great.
for coming in.
Thanks for having
we
me.
appreciate you and
Appreciate
appreciate
it.
all that you do to help keep our community safe.
Oh, it's a fun job.
Yeah.
I can't imagine doing anything else.
That's right.
You guys get to see some cool stuff, I can imagine.
do.
So, if somehow you didn't pick it up in this podcast somewhere, if someone wants to submit a tip, how do they do that?
All right, they can go to our website, 639tips.com. There you'll also find a link to our app, the P3 Tips app. You can download it at 639tips.com/app, or you can call us at 936-639-TIPS. We have an answering service that'll answer 24 hours a day, and then they'll submit the tip to us electronically, so we never get your information. If it results in an arrest or a property recovery, you might be eligible for a cash reward, and sometimes they're pretty sizable.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, if you see something, say something.
Absolutely.
So make this community better by doing that. So thank you so much. We appreciate your time. This was
Thank you.
super interesting, very insightful. We love episodes like that. We want to thank you so much for listening to the podcast again this week. If you'll do us a huge favor and share this podcast with someone who you think will find this interesting. If they're listening to true crime podcasts or documentaries, I promise you they'll like this information. Share this episode with them. It will just help expand the reach and get more people listening to this podcast who might be interested in the stories that we tell every week. So thank you so much again for listening, and we'll see you next Monday.